The Science of Hypnotism, edited and compiled by L. E. Young in 1899. Audiobook version by Felix Warren. Chapter 1. Hypnotism is a Science. What hypnotism means. When hypnotism was discovered, and by whom. The different names this science has been known by. Hypnotism, comparatively speaking, is a new word, although the science is as old as the world, as old as the human mind. In whatever quarter we direct our researches, whether it be in dusty old manuscripts or deciphering hieroglyphics, we find the indelible traces of the influence of man over man. Diodorus of Sicily writes, "The ancient Egyptian priests threw each other into trances, thus showing that they understood something of the art of hypnotism. On the zodiac in the arched wall of the temple at Dendera, Isis is depicted holding a child by the hand while she passes her other hand in front of him in the attitude of a magnetizer." Prosper Alpinus, in his treatise on the Egyptian practice of medicine, mentions their mysterious chafing and rubbing and manipulating of the body for all disease. In India, mythology represents Vishnu with flames issuing from his finger ends, and it was said that the light and heat from them cured all the ills of life. The fakirs of India have great dexterity in their Sankhya philosophy, and believe that they, like Copula, are perpetually exempt from every sort of evil and bodily ills. They practice their arts today the same as they have for thousands of years. India is the home of occult sciences, and the peculiar rules and doctrines of their faith are laid down in several of their holy books, especially in the Yoga Satra, which teaches how an ascetic or devotee can enter the fourth stage of life, in which the human soul becomes permanently united to the Supreme Being, which gives man the mysterious power to control all other men who are not advanced into the yoga system of Hindu philosophy. Sanskrit literature tells of one Indian god, Brahman, who introduced medicine into all India. Charaka tells us that Brahman, with gentle words and a few passes of the left hand over the forehead of his patient, would produce a sleep which had a wonderful power, and that he became renowned as a healer of bodily ills, and seldom used herbs. From Brahman comes down the long road of the time saying that magic and medicine are combined. The Assyrian scholars having recently brought to light the proof that the old word magi signifies reverend, and that the early Scythian, who inhabited Babylonia 500 years BC, gave the title magi to their most learned priests and philosophers. They were not only the keeper of the sacred things, the learned god of the people, the philosophers and servants of God, but diviners and mantics, wonder-workers and prophets. They were believed to have the power to call up the dead, to be able to bring disaster whenever they wished, by resorting to awful formulas which were in their exclusive possession, to heal the sick by means of water and passes of the hand. The oldest traditions of Persia hold that these Babylonian sages had control over darkness and fire, as well as over the mind and body of man. In matter of fact, the word magi became a general name for wonderful effects, produced in some mysterious way. The law of nature being little known, one thing was not more incredible than another, and effects were assigned to causes in the most arbitrary and accidental way. The Rosicrucian physicians treated a case of wounding by applying the salve to the weapon instead of to the wound itself, and the wound was healed. Hippocrates believed in somnambulistic powers. It is also well known that exhibitions were got up, and that Aristophanes openly derided the wizards of olden days. Thus we find that the broad idea that man is endowed with a dual mental organization is far from being new. The essential truth of the proposition has been recognized by philosophers of all ages and nations of the civilized world. That man is a trinity made up of body, soul, and the spirit was a cardinal tenet in the early faith of the ancient Greek philosophers, who thus clearly recognized the dual character of man's mental or spiritual organization. Plato's idea of terrestrial man was that he is a trinity of soul, soul-body, and earth-body. The mystic jargon of the Hermetic philosopher declares the same general idea. The salt, sulfur, and mercury of the ancient alchemists doubtless refers to man as being composed of a trinity of elements. The early Christian fathers confidently proclaimed the same doctrine as is shown in the writings of Clement, Origen, Titian, and many other early exponents of Christian doctrine. Therefore, it is safe to state that man has or appears to have two minds, each endowed with separate and distinct attributes and powers, each capable, under certain conditions, of independent action. It should be clearly understood at the outset that for the purpose of arriving at a correct conclusion it is a matter of indifference whether we consider that man is endowed with two distinct minds, or that his one mind possesses certain attributes and powers under some conditions, and certain other attributes and powers under other conditions. It is sufficient to know that everything happens just as though he were endowed with a dual mental organization. In recent years, the doctrine of duality of mind is beginning to be more clearly defined, and it may now be said to constitute a cardinal principle in the philosophy of many of the ablest exponents of this new, yet old psychology. Thousands of examples might be cited to show what in all ages the truth has been dimly recognized by men of all civilized races and in all conditions of life. Indeed, it may be safely predicted of every man of intelligence and refinement that he has often felt within himself an intelligence not the result of education, a perception of truth independent of the testimony of his bodily senses. It is natural to suppose that a proposition, the substantial correctness of which has been so widely recognized, must not only possess a solid basis of truth, but must, if clearly understood, possess a veritable significance of the utmost importance to mankind. Now, as we are willing to acknowledge two minds, and to recognize that the two minds possess distinct characteristics essentially unlike, we know that each is endowed with separate and distinct attributes and powers, and that each is capable, under certain conditions and limitations, of independent action. We know, then, that the general difference between man's two minds may be stated as follows. The objective mind takes cognizance of the objective world. It is the outgrowth of man's physical necessities. It is his guide in his struggles with his material environment. Its highest function is that of reasoning clearly. The second, or subjective mind, takes cognizance of its environment by means independent of the physical senses. It perceives by intuition. It is the seat of the emotions and the storehouse of memory. It performs its highest functions when the objective senses are in abeyance. In a word, it is that intelligence which makes itself manifest in a hypnotic subject, when he is in a state of somnambulism. It is in this state many of the most wonderful feats of the subjective mind are performed. It sees without the use of the natural organs of vision, and in this, as in many other grades or degrees of the hypnotic state, it can be made, apparently, to leave the body, and travel to distant lands and bring back intelligence, oftentimes of the most exact and truthful character. It also has the power to read the thought of others, even to the minutest details, to read the contents of sealed envelopes and of closed books. In short, it is the subjective mind that possesses what is popularly designated as clairvoyant power, and the ability to apprehend the thought of others without the aid of the ordinary objective means of communication. 2,000 years ago, the inhabitants of East India understood the relations of the two minds to each other, and this we must partly attribute to their great success in all matters relating to this most wonderful of science. The history of the Middle Ages is full of wonders, mysteries, and experiments, all wrought to master this science, which comes down to us with a newness and a vastly undiscovered sphere that no other science offers this generation. During the Middle Ages, all Europe studied this science under many names, such as magic, mind-reading, wonder-working, secret mysterious, animal magnetism, Hindu science, willpower, soul power, unnatural sleep, psychology, clairvoyance, witchcraft, somnambulism, mesmerism, mineral power, personal magnetism, and now the name of this century is hypnotism. The Middle Ages can boast of many distinguished names among the students who attempted to treat the secret mysterious as a grand science, by which the workings of nature could be discovered, and a godlike power be acquired over the spirits, men, and the elements. The principal students and professors were Pope Sylvester II, Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, Raymond Lully, Pico della Mirandola, Paracelsus, Cornelius Agrippa, Trithemius, Van Helmont, and perhaps the most noted of that era, Jerome Cardan, who left behind him many valuable papers pertaining to his researches along this line. He mentions a state of insensibility produced by a magnet. He also speaks of bright spots throwing a subject to sleep. Again, he states, "A sudden glance cast unexpectedly upon a highly sensitive subject will cause him to start forward." Paracelsus asserts his theory of double magnetism, and shows that the magnetic fluid of a healthy body attracts the weaker and deteriorated magnet of an unhealthy one. So also do Glossenius, Burgrave, Helenotius, Robert Flood, Father Kircher, and Maxwell, in the latter part of the 16th and early part of the 17th centuries. These latter considered that the magnet was endowed with the principle of existence. A great number of more or less hazy works, full of abstract terms, often misunderstood by those who employed them, have been handed down to posterity, and they all show the influence of that passionate love of the marvelous which humanity seems unable to shake off. It would seem, indeed, from all past experience, and even judging from the present state of society, that an irresistible attraction draws us toward the study of the occult sciences at the close of each century. Then the attraction dies away and vanishes, to rejoin the forgotten bygone ages that have preceded it, only to return to us when another age is about to depart. The close of the 18th century, filled as it was with a feverish and mystical activity, proved no exception to the rule. A worldly-minded generation, overflowing with nervous temperament and overexcited by the expectation of some great event, was inevitably destined to produce such a man as Mesmer. In this name, full of magic reminiscences, our waning 19th century sees one who has been cruelly traduced, and it is almost ready to worship him. His name is to be rehabilitated, and the charlatan of former days is very near being transformed into the great man of the present time. Mesmer is proclaimed to be the creator of scientific magnetism, the scholar who has given us the fruitful inheritance whose ideas and labors have led to vast researches. Mesmer argued that the sun and moon and stars acted on the human body by means of a subtle fluid, which he called animal magnetism, in order to point out its affinity with the magnet. A few years later came Father Hell, a Jesuit who cured diseases by means of magnetized iron. In 1787, a pupil of Dr. Mesmer, the Marquis Chastanet de Puysegur, attracted all the scientific world to Buzanki, near Soissons, where he obtained most remarkable results. Dr. Cloquet relates that he saw there patients no longer the victims of violent hysterical fits, but enjoying a calm, peaceful, restorative, and silent slumber. It may be said that from this moment, really efficacious and useful magnetism became known. Puysegur had resuscitated magnetism. Public opinion had become infatuated once more about this new agent that was to be gratuitous means of curing mankind. Puységur's tree, impregnated with the fluid, was touched by hundreds of persons who came from all parts, and the effects were most beneficial. The learned naturalist Deleuze wrote in 1813 the Histoire critique du magnétisme animal, which sums up the question as it stood at that period. About the same time there appeared in southern Germany Father Gassner, a priest, who effected some wonderful cures. This method consisted of the patient being ushered into a semi-dark room, and then, from a portiere, Father Gassner emerged with outstretched hands, carrying the crucifix held aloof. Directing his gaze sharply on the patient, he exclaimed in thundering tones in Latin, Detur nihi evidens signum prestigio praeternalius Precipio huc in nomine Jesu. If the individual was at all susceptible, he would fall into the crisis or unconscious state. Father Gassner was a wise man, much ahead of his time, and he took advantage of it. Among the men who stood by him and believed in his science were Karl Albrecht, Prince of Hohenlohe-Wallenberg, and Ludwig Joseph, Bishop of Freisinger. In 1820, Dr. Bertrand, formerly a cadet at the École Polytechnique, held a course of public lectures on magnetism and orthodox science, now took up the interesting questions. Dr. Husson at the Hôtel Dieu, Dr. Georget and Dr. Raston at the Salpêtrière induced Baron Dupotet to perform experiments in their different wards, many experiments proving very wonderful. In 1825, Dr. Foissac persuaded the Academy of Medicine of Paris, France, to take up the subject, and that learned body of the most noted men of the world admitted that magnetism did exist. Considered either as an agent of physiological phenomena or as a curative means, said the members of this commission, magnetism must be allotted a place in medical knowledge. Consequently, doctors alone must make use of it, or at least superintend its application. The Commission has collected and noted down facts important enough to warrant the Academy's authorizing the study of magnetism as a serious branch of psychology and natural history. The above declaration was signed by Bourdois, de la Motte, Finguer Guenet de Mussy, Guersont, Itard J. Larue, Marais, Thilet. From this time, magnetism was in the hands of honest men, and has never since gone astray. It is, of course, like all great scientists, open to doubt, and its partisans may even be considered mad, but with the exception of Mesmer's cupidity, none of its adherents have been swayed by mercenary motives. Puysegur indeed offered a striking contrast to Mesmer, and avoided all public exhibitions and everything that could affect the imagination, never choosing special subjects, but experimenting on peasants, male or female, afflicted with stubborn and matter-of-fact diseases. He, however, admitted the marvelous and benefited in somnambulistic lucidity. About the same period, Baron du Potet invented the magic mirror, which convulsed so many people. The famous magnetizer first traced on the floor with a bit of charcoal a complete and blackened circle. The subject drew near and then receded, looking alternately at the spectators and at the circle. Soon, writes Baron du Potet, the effect is visible. The subject's head is lowered, his whole person becomes uneasy, he turns round and round the circle without taking his eyes off it, then bends lower, rises again, draws back a few steps, then advances again, frowns, looks morose and gloomy, and breathes heavily. The most curious scene then follows. The subject, without doubt, sees images reflected in the mirror, for his perturbation, his emotion, his strange motions, his sobs, tears, anger, despair, and fury, all prove the disorder and agitation of his mind. For him it is no dream or nightmare. The apparitions are relative, and a series of future events represented by figures and signs that he understands, unfold themselves before him, filling him in turn with joy or sadness, as they pass before his eyes. Soon he is seized with a transport of frenzy, strives to lay hold of the phantoms, and dashing forward stamps with his foot upon the blackened circle. The dust flies up, and the operator now approaches and puts an end to this dramatic performance, so full of excitement and terror. In all this, du Potet fancied he saw magic, but hypnotism obtained by physical means brings about the same results, but in a very pleasant way. Father Lecordier, from the pulpit of Notre Dame, acknowledged the existence of magnetism. Wrapped in a fictitious sleep, he said, man sees through opaque bodies. He is able to indicate remedies that heal and appears to know things he knew not while awake. The enthusiasm now became universal in France. The new ideas found disciples even amongst the clergy, and an encyclical letter from the Holy Inquisition was addressed to the Roman Catholic bishops, July 30th, 1856, warning them against the errors and dangers of magnetism. The next to call attention to it was Dr. James Braid, a surgeon of Manchester, England. After incredulously witnessing experiments by La Fontaine, a French traveling mesmerist, he became interested in the science, and later on Dr. Braid renamed his science to hypnotism, and employed his method in all cases possible. Dr. Braid, however, did not seek to deny magnetism, for he wrote as follows in his book on neurohypnology. For a long time I believed the phenomena produced by my experiments and those produced by mesmerists to be identical, and after a close investigation I have come to the conclusion that there is a certain analogy in the effects produced on the nervous system. Nevertheless, and judging from the effects magnetizers declare they have obtained in certain cases, there seems to be enough differentia to lead one to consider hypnotism and mesmerism as two distinct agents. When Dr. Braid made this discovery, hypnotism had its origin, and the fact was established that sleep could be induced by physical agents. This, it must be remembered, is the essential difference between these two classes of phenomena, for magnetism supports a direct action of the magnetizer on the magnetized subject, an action which does not exist in hypnotism. This distinction is not generally made, hence the confusion between the two methods. Whenever the word hypnotism is therefore employed, the reader must remember that it is sleep induced by physical agents that is understood, that is to say, sleep obtained by fixing the gaze on some object, as Dr. Braid discovered, or by some sudden sound, like that of a Chinese gong, such as is used at present at La Salpêtrière. When, on the other hand, the word magnetism is employed, it will be understood that reference is made to a subject passing from a waking condition to that of sleep, owing to the personal action of the experimentist on the experimentized. Following his example came Dr. Isdale, presidency surgeon of Bengal at Calcutta, who employed hypnotism in nearly all his operations. Then for a few years this science made little if any progress. The value of this wonderful braid discovery was not appreciated by the English, and it was not until the continental scientists extended their researches that he obtained substantial recognition. Liebald was the first to confirm his experiments. He was, in fact, the founder of what is now known as the Nancy School of Hypnotism. It was founded in 1866. Many prominent scientists have followed him, among them worth a special mention: Charles Richet, Bermond, Bones, Delboeuf, Bayon, Fachal, Mabille, Legois, Forel, Chasse-Ferret, and Alfred Binet. Also Professor Bernheim, the author of the book Suggestive Therapeutics, which many assert to be the best medical work on hypnotism and therapeutic suggestion which has ever been written. Professor Bernheim for years was a member of the faculty at Nancy. Professor Charcot of the Paris Salpêtrière is also known as the founder of a school of hypnotism, which is generally known as the Paris School or the School of the Salpêtrière. Charcot's great reputation as a scientist obtained for him many followers. Professor Charcot mostly hypnotized ladies, and especially hysterics. At La Salpêtrière, he studied hypnotism mostly through hysterical subjects. Charcot has, by his cures, done an immense good, curing people by the thousands of a number of diseases. To Charcot is given the honor of first classifying the different phases of hypnotic sleep into the lethargic, cataleptic, and somnambulistic stages. To Dr. Berg is given the honor of reviving hypnotism in France, and it is to him the world owes the knowledge of the effects of different metals upon the human system. Dr. J. Loys, a member of the Academy of Medicine, has performed many curious experiments in the Hospital de la Charité. The action of physical agents, even at a distance, and of suggestion are both admitted at La Charité. Dr. Loys's method we give later on in this work. Jarval, an ophthalmologist member of the Academy of Medicine, and Dr. Fauveau de Carmels are making wonderful discoveries in their researches on the eyes through the power and aid of hypnotism. We can furnish Dr. Fauveau de Carmel's latest book on hypnotism as it is practiced in the European hospitals. This work is illustrated and sells for $2.50, sent post-paid by mail. Albert Moll of Berlin, Germany, who is one of the ablest and certainly one of the most unprejudiced of modern scientific writers on the subject of hypnotism, writes as following. Considering the light of our present knowledge of hypnotism, the most we can accomplish toward an explanation of it is to compare its phenomena with those observed in waking life. By way of explanation, let us suppose that we are trying to explain a hypnotic negative hallucination of sight. We must compare it with the corresponding phenomenon in waking life. By doing so, we will notice that in the hypnotic state, the patient fails to perceive any object which the operator tells him he cannot see, while in waking life we should be all the more certain to see an object when told that it is not there, from the fact of our attention being directed toward it. In explanation of this point of difference, Dr. Moll, following Wundt, assumed the existence of a so-called dream consciousness in the hypnotic state. It is believed by means of this method of analogy, many phenomena, both hypnotic and post-hypnotic, can be explained. Self-observation is a most valuable aid to the investigation. A great number of different states are included under the head of hypnosis, and takes up the discussion of the various hypnotic phenomena in the following order. First, the phenomena of suggestion as regards voluntary movements. Second, positive and negative delusions of the senses. Third, rapport. Fourth, the phenomena of memory. Fifth, post-hypnotic suggestion. Two rules are emphasized by Dr. Moll as of great importance in enabling us to clearly comprehend the various symptoms of the hypnotic condition. The first is that men have a certain proneness to allow themselves to be influenced by others through their ideas, and, in particular, to believe much without making conscious logical deductions. The second rule, a psychological or physiological effect tends to appear in a man if he is expecting it. Dr. Moll gives some very interesting cases of his researches in his new book, Hypnotism as a Science. The price of this book is $2.50 sent by mail, fully prepaid. We furnish all books mentioned in this volume that we can procure in America. We will do this to accommodate the readers who may be unable to purchase it in their locality. The time is coming, in fact almost at hand, when the subject of hypnotism will interest this entire nation, and that class of literature will be eagerly sought after. End of Chapter 1.